Welcome to yet another episode of Fourth and Inches, already episode 8, the halfway point in the season. Pretty bananas. I'm your host, Nate Smith, alongside my cohorts, Jordan D'Souza and Christian Eggerbeatty. After this week, we have a decent picture of who's good in the NFL. After another rambunctious weekend of football, some great coaching, some great playing. Some fan bases went absolutely wild. Looking at you, Buffalo. There was yet another tie this weekend that makes 2 ties in the past 2 weeks, which is 2 ties too many, if you ask me. I think the tie rule is stupid and should be abolished. Play till the death. But hey, that's an argument for another time. As customary, we now must discuss the weekend's events. And so I will start with Jordan. How was your weekend?
My weekend was very good. It was Halloween, so got a little dressed up. Not gonna lie, dressed up as a blue Care Bear, which was my favorite growing up. I just thought he was a great guy. Man, he's just a overall great character for the show. I actually kind of just stole this costume. Not really stole, but I mean it was a $20 Care Bear onesie from Target. That's pretty much a bargain, if you ask me. Overall, good weekend, good football. Hung out with some good guys. Christian.
Yeah, this weekend, as always, was a great time. I did a little nomadic venture down to Tucson, Arizona, the Dirty T, as some people call it these days. And I can vouch for that. It was certainly a nasty time. Hung out with all my buddies that attend the University of Arizona, and they accept me even though I'm a Sun Devil. And we just had a great little Halloween weekend together. Dressed up as an In-N-Out worker where I was formerly employed. So kind of went pretty vanilla costume, but it still worked. It received good looks. So yeah, no complaints. Saw some good football. And one more tie for this year, making 2 on the year, which is always exciting but ultimately disappointing. I do agree with you, Nate. But yeah, great weekend overall. Ready to get after it right now.
I'm going to have to disagree with both of you guys on this one. I'm actually a big proponent for the tie. I just think it's a very entertaining and a good way to finish a football game. The only thing I do like more than ties is actually sitting down for the national anthem at a football game. The one thing I've never really looked forward to do is you're just kind of sitting in your seat waiting for the football game to start, and then the guy over the PA says, "Please stand." No one's ever been like, "All right, yeah, nice, let's stand." It's just always like, ugh, and you'd make that noise and kind of just slowly get up. And even on top of that, when I was like little, obviously I would go to the concessions and get lots of food. You just have plates of chicken tenders on your lap. You got a soda in your hand. It's all crowded, and you got to somehow maneuver that. Put that on the ground without stepping on it. It's just a whole mess. So I think everyone should move to the kind of motion of sitting down for the national anthem and then putting the fist up. That's to each their own for that one. But we'll discuss that at a different time.
I'm just going to choose to ignore Jordan as a human for the next 2 hours because that was outrageous. As far as my weekend was concerned, it was another solid one. Friday night, went to a riveting high school game. Cover that for my journalism beat here at Arizona State. When I say riveting, it is very sarcastic. It was a very boring game that took way too long, and I did not want to be there on a Friday night. But hey, as journalists, we must make sacrifices from time to time, in pursuit of my big J degree. But Halloween weekend was a good time overall. Dressed as the famous Homer Simpson, the world-renowned actor from the show The Simpsons, which was one of my childhood favorites and still all-time favorites to this day. Very, very good comedic show. Highly recommended to anyone who has not seen more than a few episodes. But the weekend was quality overall. Had a good time with some good people. And now we're down to get to some real business, which is the foosball. And here we go with the Week 8 rapid recap. Kicking things off on a Thursday night, we had the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Tennessee Titans. The Titans won this one by a score of 36-22. Bortles looked horrid. Among his release, there are many problems with the Jacksonville organization that need addressing. Jags continue their struggles, dropping to a dismal 2-5. Mariota was pretty efficient on the other end, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. DeMarco Murray had a nice game on the ground, 123 yards and 1 score. However, he did leave late in the game with a hamstring injury. Hopefully that's not too serious. Redskins at Bengals in London, yet another tie, 27-27. Just an ugly game throughout. Washington put up some good offensive numbers, but a sloppy finish. Redskins kicker Dustin Hopkins shanked a potential game winner. We had another game forced to a tie because of a kicker missing a chip shot. So, kickers, let's get your stuff together. Andy Dalton also had a chance to put the Bengals in better position, but he had a late fumble, which is part of the reason this game ended in a tie. Cousins finished with 458 yards and 2 touchdowns. Chiefs at Colts. Chiefs won this one by a score of 30-14. They improved to an impressive 5-2. Andy Reid has the boys in red rolling. Nick Foles subbed in because Alex Smith suffered an injury. Went 223 yards and 2 touchdowns. Impressive day and limited action time. Travis Kelce had quite the day with 101 yards receiving and 1 score. Raiders at Buccaneers. Raiders won a wild one, 30-24 in overtime. Carr to Seth Roberts for the win. Carr finished with an incredible 513 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. Cooper had 173 yards receiving and 1 touchdown. What a day for the Alabama product. Lions at Texans. Houston won this one by a score of 20-13. Neither offense could really get things going. Stafford led the game with 240 yards through the air and 1 score. On the other side, Lamar Miller had 56 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. Jets at Browns. Browns got close to their first win of the year, but not close enough. Jets took this one by a score of 31-28. Cleveland falls to 0-8. I do think they might go defeated this year. We shall see. Josh McCown had a surprisingly good day. 341 yards, 2 touchdowns, but did have 2 picks. Matt Forte, 82 yards on the ground with 2 scores. Patriots at Bills Mafia. Pats won this one by a score of 41-25. This game was not close in any way. Brady continues his utter dominance from when he's back from suspension. Had 315 yards through the air with 4 TDs. Gronk, another big day. He's liking having Brady back as his quarterback. 109 yards with 1 touchdown. Chargers at Broncos. Denver won this one by a score of 27-19. Trevor Siemian had an average day, 276 yards through the air with 1 pick. Melvin Gordon had 111 rushing yards, and the Denver D had 3 picks, 1 return for a score. Teams on bye in Week 8 were the Rams, Dolphins, Giants, Steelers, 49ers, and Ravens. And that's the Week 8 rapid recap. The first game we will dive into on this beautiful Tuesday evening will be the Seattle Seahawks at the New Orleans Saints. Saints squeak this one out at home by a score of 25-20. Saints improved to 3-4. Seattle drops to 4-2-1 because of their tie with Arizona last week. Drew Brees, pretty good day considering the impressive defense he faced. 27-35, 265 yards with 1 score and no picks. On the other side, Russell Wilson actually played one of his better games of the year despite throwing no touchdowns. He had 253 yards and 1 pick. Guys, the Saints have always had an explosive offense, but this year it seems like they're starting to figure it out a little bit on the defensive side. You know, I'm not saying they're a playoff team by any means, but if the Saints can get their defense going to even a serviceable level with this high-quality offense, could the Saints potentially make a wild card run, if not this year, in a couple years?
I mean, if they're going to make a wild card run, I think their defense is going to have to get there sooner rather than later. I mean, Drew Brees isn't getting any younger. But, I mean, you look at this game, I mean, their offense really did well. They put up 25 points against the Seahawks, but the end of the game, the defense pretty much won this for the Saints. I mean, just watching it, this was like the typical game that the Saints lose. I mean, they give the ball back to the Seahawks. They have decent field position. 2 minutes, 30 seconds, you figure, okay, Saints defense is a train wreck. Russell Wilson will easily punch this one in. And they did end up getting it to the goal line, but the Saints defense held strong with a big stop, which also was a huge victory, just looking at the way that the NFC South division standing right now. I mean, 3 and 4, that division's pretty much up for grabs at this point. Just a few games and they're right behind the Falcons. So definitely, I think if the defense can really take a few steps forward, then we will be looking at a perennial playoff team in the Saints.
Yeah, I thought this game was pretty interesting. Seeing that the Seahawks went up against an explosive offense, by all accounts, in the Arizona Cardinals last week and held them to only 6 points. It was great to see the Saints come in and put up 25 points. And the Seahawks, I mean, their defense is phenomenal. We know that. But this Seahawks offense just looks dysfunctional to me at times. Russell Wilson has not been playing very well. And the rushing attack has been good and then just non-existent almost. It's been very inconsistent. So, I don't know. The Seahawks are going to have to figure out how they're playing on the offensive side of the ball and what their identity is. I think a large part of that was losing Marshawn Lynch, because that was kind of their identity before was, yeah, we run the ball and we play great defense, and that's how we win games. So now they're kind of struggling on the offensive side, and that's what's lost them a few of these games in the first half of the season. But to answer your question, the Saints are right there in the divisional race for the NFC South. Falcons are only 5-3, so sitting there just 2 games back. The Saints, if they can keep winning these close games, because you're right, Jordan, this is kind of a game that the Saints usually find a way to lose. But the defense held tough there at the end, bend but don't break, and they had to give up a touchdown to lose it. They didn't do that, so props to the Saints defense for kind of coming up big there. But I do think they could be in the run for a wild card spot, and I mean the division's not automatically won by the Falcons, so I think, you know, if they keep playing good football, their schedule's pretty easy going forward, so I think they could make a run at a playoff spot because Breeze is just playing out of his mind this year.
And just to touch on the Seahawks offense again, I think what you were saying was absolutely correct. They don't really have an identity at this point. Like when they had Marshawn Lynch, their MO was they're going to run the ball heavy for the first half, just wear your defense down, and that's what's really going to open up the play action pass and allow Russell Wilson, who's one of the more creative quarterbacks in the NFL, just to kind of use his legs, and he does have very good arm strength, just to kind of like loosen the reins on him a little bit to let him be creative, and that's how they ended up scoring their points. I mean, they by no means had that great of talent at the wide receiver position when they were at their best, and they don't really at this point now, but that was kind of their identity, and I think they're kind of at a loss for that.
Yeah, well, I agree with you guys. I mean, the Saints, if they get hot, they could be an interesting team because there's never been a question offensively. They can tie their defense together just a little bit. They could get interesting down the stretch here. But I think this begs another question. Seattle, we all know how good the defense is. But offensively, look at some of these stats against a pretty poor Saints defense. They only had 15 first downs the entire game. 74 rushing yards. I mean, with these kind of numbers, can Seattle keep winning games? You know, can they make it to the playoffs, and if they squeak in, can they have any success in the NFC?
I mean, say what you want. I mean, they haven't looked their best. They are sitting at 4-2-1 right now. There's a lot of teams in that division that wish they had a record like that. They are still ahead of their division. I think they're one of these teams that like to get hot towards the end of the year, so I'm going to hold off any judgment on them until around like week 10, week 11, because that's when usually Russell Wilson and this defense turns it on. But if they keep it up like this, I don't really see them going that far in the NFC. But then again, the NFC also has been pretty weak up to this point. I mean, the best team in the NFC right now is the Cowboys, and the second best team is the Vikings, and we just saw what happened to them Monday night. I mean, we'll get into that later. But I just think that really the NFC is wide open this year for any team to really take it over.
Yeah, I mean, the Seahawks definitely need to find that identity because there's no problem on the defensive side of the ball. They just need to find a way to put up some points. And I do think they'll be okay as far as playoff picture because the NFC West really is not that tough. You look at the Rams, Niners, and then the Cardinals, who have not been playing like themselves lately. So I think they're definitely going to be in the race for winning the division. If not, they're definitely going to snag a wild card spot like they did last season. So I don't really think it's, to the point of making the playoffs concern, but if they want to go deep, which obviously they have aspirations to do because they've been to the Super Bowl twice in the last 4 years, they're definitely going to need to, shore up the offensive side. And it's not that they're turning the ball over extremely a lot in any fashion. They just kind of don't move the ball. They're a little stagnant right now on the offensive side, which we saw a lot in the Arizona game and then also in this game against the defense that they should be moving the ball pretty fluidly on. So they're definitely just going to need to start running the ball a little better. And I think Russell Wilson, once he gets able to be play action, roll out, and find some space, he'll be a lot better also.
Moving on, we had Arizona at the Carolina Panthers. The Cardinals lost again. They seem to be reeling. The Panthers entered this game with only one win, but they were able to find another one in the confines of Bank of America Stadium. The Panthers are an interesting team because they lost the NFC title game last year. Big expectations coming into this year. They've played horribly. The defense finally showed up Sunday, played a good game. I don't know if it was that or more Arizona's offensive line looked horrendous. I think it was just a bad combination for the Cardinals. Carson Palmer was one bright spot for Arizona, had 363 yards through the air, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception with a quarterback rating of 111.1. Pretty impressive. David Johnson was invisible. His first truly bad game of the year. 10 carries for only 24 yards. Cam Newton on the other side only had 212 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Jonathan Stewart tore it up on the ground, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns. Guys, these are two teams that are pretty bad right now. Out of Arizona and Carolina, who is in a better spot at the moment?
Right now, I still think that you have to go with Arizona, that they're in the better spot. They're sitting at 3-4-1, which is at second or third in their division. Yeah, and they're still only a few games back of first. But then you look at the Panthers, they're sitting at 2-5 right now, still kind of in the lower ranks of their division. But this was a very good game for the Panthers overall. They played some really timely defense. I mean, you just look at the stats. They had 8 sacks of Carson Palmer, 1 defensive touchdown. And I think on the offensive side, it was a very careful and meticulous game from Cam Newton and the offense. They didn't turn the ball over once. And I think at this point, that's going to be how they're going to have to play for the rest of the season. Stat correction, they did have 1 turnover overall, but still, it was a very careful game being played by the Panthers. They're just going to need to play kind of that way for the rest of the year if they want to still make the playoffs. They're going to need their front 7 to really step up because their secondary has been absolutely invisible this year.
Yeah, definitely. I also believe the Cardinals are in a better spot than the Panthers. Panthers are dead last right now in the NFC South, which isn't necessarily a great division in the first place. So, yeah, definitely a tough spot for them. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to fight their way to the playoffs. I think a large part of that is that their defense is not as formidable as it was last season. So I think you're right. Because their defense isn't as good, they're going to have to take care of the ball more and kind of have more of a, steady approach to their offense instead of just running and gunning. But, yeah, definitely a big game for the Cardinals, to lose because, now in that NFC West division, every game matters between them and the Seahawks. So anytime the other team loses, you definitely want to be able to get a leg up and get a win. And they couldn't do that against the Panthers team that had been struggling a ton. They were sitting at 1-5 coming into this game. So big win for the Panthers just to kind of right the ship a little bit. Because anytime you're 1-5, coming off a year when you were in the Super Bowl, little Super Bowl hangover kind of, you definitely want to just get back on track with a big win. And it's so funny because, this was the NFC Championship matchup last year. And now we're talking about it as, 2 teams that are under 500. So it's just funny how football works that way. But the Cardinals, I'm not really sure what's going on with their offense because they have all the pieces. I mean, Carson Palmer lit it up last year. He's shown us that he can be a very good quarterback, possibly in like the second tier of all NFL quarterbacks. I don't think he's quite tier one. And David Johnson is an absolute animal. We know that. But just even with all the weapons they have not been able to kind of put it together and have a true, explosive offensive performance probably since they played Tampa Bay and put up 40-something points. So I'm not sure, what it is that's just not clicking in the Cardinals offense. We know they like to go deep. They haven't really been able to connect on that very much lately. So I think they definitely need to figure it out because their defense has been playing well. They just really need to get the offense on board so they can kind of keep up with these teams that they're playing.
Yeah, and I know that Bruce Arians, a great coach, one of the best coaches in the NFL, and I hate to say this, but I think you can put a lot of the blame on him and the coaching staff. They haven't really made the adjustments they needed to throughout the year in order to put themselves in the position to win games. I mean, last year, we all knew what their offense was about. They had Palmer, MVP candidate. They were all about the long ball last year, and now teams are starting to take away that from them, and they're kind of lost. I mean, they have David Johnson, who they're getting a lot of production from, but they just really haven't been able to put it all together. And then defensively, everyone was saying the one thing that they really needed was an elite pass rusher. So they go out and get Chandler Jones, who's a very good defensive player, and still the defense really hasn't shown up past that. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that the coaches need to do in order to put the Cardinals back in the winning column.
I don't know. I mean, over the last couple weeks, the Cardinals' defense has actually been really good. This is the first game recently where they've really, struggled by their standards, giving up 30 points to a Carolina offense that has done little to nothing this year is not a good sign. And, yeah, you guys have mentioned their offensive struggles, but actually their offense, in my opinion, especially Carson Palmer, played pretty well this game. I mean, 340 total yards is a pretty good number. I mean, you expect somewhere around 400 from the Cardinals because of their weapons. But, you guys talk about the long ball, and that's what they definitely leaned on last year. But I look at their receiving core, and other than Fitzgerald, John Brown's had some injury problems. He was another big part of their offense. And Michael Floyd's been absolutely terrible this year. So, I mean, in Carson Palmer's defense, besides Fitz, he had, J.J. Nelson and an aging Jermaine Gresham. I mean, as far as, receiving options, he's kind of limited at the moment. I do agree this is one of the better coaching staffs in the league. So I think they'll get it figured out. I wouldn't be surprised. Palmer's been heating up the past couple weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they went on a pretty impressive second half run. Tyrann Mathieu actually injured at the moment, but they get him back in a couple weeks, I believe. And if their defense can keep doing their job and their offense can, keep picking it up, keep building on their success, I think the Cardinals might be able to make a second half run. This was considered one of the premier matchups in the NFC up to this point. The Falcons are having a surprisingly good year. Green Bay visited the Falcons in the Georgia Dome. Falcons won this one by a score of 33-32. Falcons improved to 5-3. The Packers dropped to 4-3. Rodgers, pretty solid day. 246 yards, 4 touchdowns. The yardage wasn't there, but 4 touchdowns, no picks. Pretty crazy stuff from Big Aaron. Matt Ryan continues his tear. 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. These two teams will probably be around by the end of the year. Falcons will most likely win the NFC South. The Packers, they could probably overtake the Vikings. They definitely have the talent. Out of these two teams, who do we expect to make a bigger impact in the playoffs?
I'm just going to go with the Packers on this one. We haven't really seen much from the Falcons in the past. We don't really know if this is the same old Falcons. There's been years where they've really been kind of the top of the league with offense, and then I think their defense is coming together this year. But I'm just going to go with the Packers again. I think in Rodgers we trust. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he definitely showed it this game. He had 60 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and I think as the year progresses, that's going to be the Rodgers that we definitely start to see.
I am not a huge Packers believer. I actually don't trust in Rodgers to the extent that most people do. Since, his Super Bowl run, and I think it was 2010, he really has not shown much in the playoffs. He hasn't shown himself to be necessarily a clutch or a big game quarterback in the playoffs. So I actually really like how the Falcons are looking. Their defense is starting to come around. So I think I'm going to go with the Falcons as to who will have a bigger playoff impact. And the offense that the Falcons are running is really, really explosive right now. Matt Ryan is playing like an MVP candidate. Obviously, they've got that dude Julio Jones, who is just an absolute beast. And then the little kind of 1-2 punch that they have right now with Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman is really working well. I know Coleman recently got injured, so he's going to have to be healthy if they want to make a playoff push. But just the Atlanta Falcons offense looks like it's dynamic right now. There's run and pass that they can hurt you with. So if their defense can just, be serviceable down the line, I think they'll really play well in this NFC and, be able to hurt teams very well with, their weapons on offense. We saw how they did against Seattle. They were in that game all the way till the very end. So I think in terms of who can hang with the Cowboys and the Vikings, those types of teams in the NFC, I think I give the Falcons a little bit better chance just because the Packers just don't seem to have that same swagger this year that they usually have, and I don't really trust them going down the line.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a while since we've seen the Falcons have this type of running attack. And also someone who I really like is Mohamed Sanu. They haven't really had this good of a complimentary guy for Julio Jones since like Roddy White, and that guy is pretty old. And also, I think in terms of the playoffs, what the Falcons really need to do is play timely defense. I mean, we've seen the last few years that defense really wins championships, but I think you can win with an explosive offense as long as your defense gets hot at the right times.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys are saying. In my opinion, I'm going to have to take Cray's side on this one. I do think the Falcons appear to be more of a threat at the moment than the Packers. This Falcons team just seems a little bit different to me than the one last year who petered out at the end after starting hot. I feel like Dan Quinn, now in his second year, has better control over the guys, better communication, and there's been better performance by the defense. Going out and getting Mohamed Sanu as a great complimentary receiver, he's probably one of the best number 2 receivers in the game. Arguably the best receiver in the game right now, Julio Jones, and Matt Ryan playing at an MVP level so far. If they can keep that up, I think they'll be relevant going to the playoffs for sure. You just take a look at some of their offensive stats compared to around the league. First in points, first in total yards, second in passing yards, and 14th in rushing yards. So, with that kind of ridiculous offense, it's hard not to win. If their defense can keep improving week after week, and like Cray said, just play well in the right spot. They don't even have to be dominant. They just have to get stops, when they absolutely need them. Play the bend, don't break style that the Cowboys have kind of been playing. And if they can do that at a successful level, I think the Falcons could definitely make some noise in the NFC this year. Moving to arguably the most entertaining game of the weekend, Sunday night primetime, was the Philadelphia Eagles against the Dallas Cowboys. Jordan versus Nate in a classic Philly-Dallas matchup. I was actually outnumbered while watching the game 2-1 by those ugly green Birds fans. Jordan and our friend Kling were rooting for the Birds, and I was rooting for the boys. Quite an entertaining contest. Ended up going into overtime. Cowboys squeaked one out, 29-23. Although neither team played their best, that's for sure. In my opinion, Dallas probably played their worst game of the season, including Dak Prescott. Although when it mattered most, Prescott put together a very nice game-winning drive to win the game. Just looking at some stats, Prescott finished with 287 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. Carson Wentz, 202 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. Dez Bryant, it was good to have him back. 113 yards receiving, with 1 touchdown, made an incredible catch late in the game. I guess I'll start with Jordan on this one. What's your biggest takeaway from this game?
My takeaway is that Doug Peterson should be fired. Not now, but I think he will be soon. I mean, this is the second time in the young season where he's put our team in the position to lose the game in games we have lost. And I don't really think your head coach is supposed to do that. You really expect the players to kind of drop the ball in terms of the games, but not really the coach. And I think it really all started, I think it was the beginning of the fourth quarter. We were up 10 at this point, and we just got the ball on our own 25, and we run a play to Wendell Smallwood, who ends up fumbling. Cowboys recover, they take the 3, and then it's a 1-possession game. But the one thing I question is, why is Wendell Smallwood even in the game? At this point, he's our borderline 4th-string running back, hasn't been in the game at all. It was really just kind of like I don't even know why. Like I just really cannot even think of reasons. Like Wendell Smallwood's our like second best special teams guy. There's no reason he should be carrying the ball in this position on a drive to really ice the game. And then we get the ball next possession. Josh Huff, an incredible kick return, takes it down to Dallas's 40. And then we have the ball in the near 30. And for some reason, Peterson decides to run a wide receiver pass play. I don't understand why a wide receiver is throwing the ball in this position. Those plays usually are to kind of get momentum swinging in your way. I mean, Carson Wentz is your best offensive player. The ball should be in his hands. And then on a 3rd and 6, he decides to run a halfback, what was it, a little swing pass? Yeah, it was a little swing pass where he had to throw backwards to Sproles, who loses about 8 yards on the play. I mean, that's just an idiotic play call. He has shown a lot of questionable play calling throughout the season, and then that would set us up to punt on a field goal, which would have been 53 yards, which is definitely long, and if he misses it, it puts you at a disadvantage, but Sturgis nailed a 55-yarder to end the half. So a lot of questionable decisions made by Doug Peterson, which eventually ended in a loss for the Eagles.
Yeah, this was a very interesting NFC East battle by the 2 top teams, in my opinion. And the Eagles were in control for much of this game. As you mentioned, they were up 10 at one point. But the Cowboys showed a lot of fight. The defense stepped up in some big spots for the Cowboys. And yes, Dak did have his worst game thus far, but he was still able to lead the team, keep them in this game, and then obviously we know what he did in OT to lead them down the field to score. So good to see him kind of, not every game is going to be, a cakewalk. You're going to have to kind of show some grit sometimes and fight through these tough games. So it was definitely good to see that if you're a Cowboys fan. And now you look at this Cowboys team, such a big win for them within the division, because we know they lost to the Giants earlier in the season, so you don't really want to drop any more division games. So beating the Eagles at home, huge for them. And I think it really just showed kind of the heart of this team. You learn a lot about yourself when you have to fight in a division game like this all the way through 4 quarters into overtime. And you just saw it, when Jason Witten caught that winning touchdown pass and the whole team mobbed him. Jerry World was going nuts. There's just definitely some good energy flowing through the Dallas Cowboys right now. And they kind of, have almost too much good stuff, because now Dak is playing better than what they expected, and they still have that dude Tony Romo in their back pocket. I think they should just, keep him as a backup. But it's kind of, a good problem to have when you have 2 quality quarterbacks like that.
And just to kind of talk about the Cowboys a little more, this is just such a different Cowboys team than what we've seen in the past. I think offensively and defensively, they're the perfect mix of youth and veterans. I mean, on the offensive side, you have all Pro Bowl offensive linemen. Then you have young guys like Dak and Zeke who are very energetic and just physically just dominating. And then you have guys like Witten who can really steer them in the right direction. And even Dez, also a very good veteran leader. So this is a very different Cowboys team than we've seen in the past. And like I've said before, I know I've said this a while ago, I think the Cowboys are like an elite pass rusher away from being true Super Bowl contenders, but they're looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are quick to forget that 2014, the Cowboys were 12-4, won a playoff game that year. came very close to beating the Packers in Lambeau, the controversial Dez Bryant catch or no catch after the refs ruling. But obviously last year was just an utter disgrace with Romo going down early in the year with an injury, having to deal with Matt Castle and Kellen Moore at quarterback. So virtually anyone but them is an upgrade. Obviously, we did not expect this level of production from Dak, but I mean, I think it says a lot about him, and I think the mentality of this team is different. It says a lot about the team and him, that even playing bad during a game, just digging deep down and finding a way to win. That's what the great teams do. Team like the Patriots that constantly win. They don't play well every Sunday, but even when they don't play well, they find a way to win. And in recent times, we haven't seen the Cowboys do that. They've been known to blow a lot of late game leads and, not finish games. And so as a lifelong Cowboy fan, to see this happen now is very encouraging. And obviously, I hope they can keep that up. NFC East is a very competitive division, so I don't think the Cowboys can afford to get comfortable in any way. They got to keep winning because I think the Eagles are sneaky good. I think they will continue to put pressure on the Cowboys. Not too worried about the Giants. I don't think they're a very good team. The Redskins have been up and down. I think the Eagles are definitely the biggest threat to the Cowboys in the division. But in football, you control your own destiny, as with life for the most part. So, I mean, if they keep winning, they got nothing to worry about. And you look at their schedule coming up, I mean, they got 3 very winnable games. Play at Cleveland this Sunday, at the Steelers with no Big Ben, and then they got the Ravens. I mean, that should be 3 wins in a row. Guys, this might sound a little wild, but is it possible that Dallas could end up as the 1 seed in the NFC?
I think it's definitely possible at this point. I think they're the best team in the division. And you look at the other teams in the NFC. I mean, the Vikings, who are the second best team in the NFC right now, we can all agree they kind of suck. They don't really have an offensive line or really an offense to this point. And, I mean, you just look at the other teams. I think the Packers would be the biggest threat for them personally. I mean, I know you guys will think the Falcons, but either one of those teams, and who knows with the Seahawks or the Cardinals. But honestly, it's just been that type of season. Why can't the Cowboys be the number 1 team in the NFC at this point? They've got the offense. Their defense is playing timely and pretty well up to this point. They've been sneaky good. Definitely quietly, they've snuck into the top 10 defensive ranks this year. But definitely, I think that the Cowboys could squeak into the top spot in the NFC.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. The Cowboys definitely could capture that number 1 NFC spot just because, the NFC is kind of such a strange conference this year. The teams we thought that were going to be good, the Panthers, the Cardinals of the world, are underperforming, and then some teams that we didn't expect to be so hot, the Eagles, the Cowboys, even the Vikings to a certain extent, are kind of the top teams in the conference. So it's very interesting this year, and you do still have the perennial winners like the Packers there that are going to be a threat, but the Cowboys already got through the Packers, so now they kind of just are full steam ahead, and I think it's a very comfortable position for them to be in. Halfway through the season will be next week after they, I would assume, beat the Browns to move to 7-1, which, you think about the Patriots are 7-1 in the exact same spot over in the AFC. So right now I do kind of see the Cowboys and the Patriots headed towards that number 1 spot in their respective conferences. And, it's going to be hard for the other teams in the NFC to stop the momentum that the Cowboys are starting to build up because they're really on a hot streak right now. And if they keep this energy going, I don't see anyone stopping that.
And now for the nightcap of our in-depth analysis. We had the Monday night. We'll go to the Monsters of the Midway. Chicago Bears took on the Purple People Eaters, Minnesota Vikings, on Halloween night, Monday night. Bears surprisingly took this one by a score of 20-10. Cutler had a nice day against a very good defense, top 5 defense, arguably the best defense. I mean, not after this game maybe, but they've been hot. Cutler had 252 yards, one score. I think the most impressive stat for him is no picks. He's been known to throw a lot of picks in his career. No picks this night, but the real star of the show was Jordan Howard. 26 carries, 153 yards, and a score, averaging 6 yards a carry with a long of 69. Have a day, Mr. Howard. Vikings offense, non-existent. Put up a whopping 10 points. Bears defense was sneaky good. Guys, 2 questions. Can Cutler turn around this Bears franchise? Maybe not this year, but finish out this year strong and then lead into next year on a positive note. That's question 1. Question 2, do we see the Vikings recover after a 2-game losing streak, or do they continue to plummet?
So on Jay Cutler, I think that Jay Cutler can turn around this year and finish off strong, but I think at this point he will no longer be in the Bears after this year. I mean, I think his contract goes until 2020, I believe. $78 million. None of that is guaranteed. So I think that the Bears have made it known that they are going to part ways with Cutler at the end of the year. But it really was nice to just kind of see him play well, see him smiling on the sidelines, actually showing some emotion for once. That was good. And for the Vikings, I think that the Vikings have some serious concerns, especially on their offensive line. I mean, we've all seen teams that don't have offensive lines, and that's really the main component to winning football. Because if you don't have an O-line, you can't run. If you can't run, if you can't run, then you can't throw. And if you can't throw, then you can't score points. And then your defense is going to be on the field the entire game. And that's really what it came down to for the Vikings. The Bears have not a very good offense at all, but they still end up hanging 20 points on them. So I think the Vikings have some serious concerns with their O-line heading forward.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Jordan. The Minnesota O-line is definitely something that needs to be addressed. They're one of the worst in the league right now. You see Sam Bradford back there, and Bradford under pressure is never really a pretty sight. He doesn't do very well when he's pressured. So the Bears were able to get to him. I think it was 8 times they sacked him, which is unbelievable for one game, making him feel uncomfortable back there, not able to get the ball to his main weapon, Stephon Diggs, as much as he would have liked. And then, also just the Minnesota offense, we talked about it, I think, last week, has been, so bad. They're, either 31st or 30th, I believe, in the league in overall offense. And yes, their defense is for real. We know this, but it's so tough when your defense has to be out there for long drives. And then, you go 3 and out and they're right back on the field. They get frustrated. And even if you're going up against the subpar offense like the Bears, that ends up taking a toll on you throughout the course of a game. So they really, really need to work on, Bradford's just got to manage the game a little better. It's so tough when you're taking, these sacks or under pressure. You got to throw the ball away, which leads to very short drives. They really need to just try to play a more balanced offensive attack because, yes, defense obviously is very important, can open up a lot of things for you to have some leeway on the offensive side, but the Vikings have just been so bad on the offensive side. I really, don't see them winning many more games unless they can at least be a serviceable offense and put up, 20 points a game as opposed to, putting up 10 points against the Chicago Bears is not a very good sign. So in regards to the Cutler question, I don't think he's going to be the answer for the Bears franchise. I think they're probably going to move on from him. And the Vikings, I do kind of see them, hitting a little bit of a cold streak in these next few weeks. So they're definitely going to have to rely on their defense to keep them in games. And Bradford's just got to kind of take care of the ball a little better and just do enough to win games. But if he tries to do too much and then he's running around back there, getting sacked 8 times, that's not a recipe for success for this team.
And I think the one kind of silver lining for this Viking season, I mean, going into the season, Teddy Bridgewater tears his ACL out for the year. If you told me that a Vikings team without Teddy Bridgewater, without Adrian Peterson, would be at 5-2 right now, sitting at the top of their division, I would have called you crazy. I mean, at this point, it hasn't really been pretty. They haven't really won games as dominantly as they would have liked to, but hey, they're 5-2 at this point, so you got to really just kind of take the last 2 games with a grain of salt and look at the big picture of this season and what they've been able to do. Really has been so impressive.
Yeah, I think a lot of that credit goes to head coach Mike Zimmer. I mean, just putting together that kind of performance with an undermanned roster without the starting quarterback and Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson is very impressive in itself. And yeah, I mean, to get down to it, I don't care how good your defense is, who you have on your defense. If you're going 3 and out every series on offense, those guys are not going to perform at the level that they need to. I mean, fatigue is a real thing in any sport. And when you're tired, when the defense isn't getting the rest that they deserve, it's going to be tough for them to continue to perform at a high level. Despite their talented roster, defensively, I think that can only take them so far because this offense has just been absolutely stagnant. And they really need to get their rushing attack going. They need to get everything going. But, I mean, their total yardage was 258 from Monday night. I mean, most NFL offenses are averaging over 300, so they really need to get that going if they really want to win down the stretch. I mean, you take a look at their upcoming schedule. Their next 3 games are not easy. They play the Lions, Redskins, and Cardinals. Lions are sneaky good. Redskins are pretty good. And the Cardinals, despite their record, are still a good team. So I think we'll find a lot about the Vikings here within these next 3 weeks. Those are 3 decently tough games for them. They've been struggling. So I think we'll have a better idea about the Vikings come the beginning of December. But, I mean, with the defense this good, as long as the offense can just be average, that's all they need. They just can't be atrocious. They just have to be average. And if they can do that, I think this team can rally and put together some wins. Moving to great segment on our show, Fantasy Heroes. Week 8 coming at you. For my fantasy team, pretty upset. After a scorching hot start to the year, 4-0. I now sit at 5-3 after 2 straight losses. But on the bright side, we're talking about heroes this week. So my hero for this week have to be Mr. Travis Kelce. Handsome individual, great football player. Had 7 receptions for 101 yards and a touchdown, totaling 16 fantasy points. Didn't blink an eye when Foles came in, continued to ball. So salute, Mr. Kelce. Nice game.
And whenever your kicker goes into double digits, he's got to be your fantasy stud of the week. Gostkowski, you've had a rough season so far, but you pulled through in the clutch for me. It was a big win for the Weston Road Flows this week. We moved to, I think, 3-5 on the season. Gostkowski put up 13 points. Thank you, Steven. Much needed.
All right. My fantasy hero of the week hails from the Brady Boys squad, who moved to 5-3 this week. It's my wide receiver, Amari Cooper. Kind of had, a so-so year thus far. He's went big in some games and then kind of been disappearing in others. But this week, 12 receptions, 173 yards and a touchdown in that overtime win at Tampa Bay. Ended up with 23.3 points, which helped the Brady Boys go on for their 3rd straight victory. Thanks, Amari, for coming back to form.
Keeping it rolling, we will move to the other side of the spectrum, the duds. I have a few options this week. Couple of my players just didn't step up to the plate like they needed to. We'll address that right now. I think I might have 2 duds for this week, actually. I might get greedy. Minnesota Vikings defense, who has been lights out all year, scored double digits every single game except for one, decides to turn in a -1 performance against Jay Cutler and the reeling Bears offense. Don't really have an answer for that one. Thanks, Vikings. And then the 3rd-ranked kicker on the year, Josh Lambo, at least coming into last week he was. Now he's dropped to 5 because he went 0 for 1 with a missed extra point. That drops him down to a score of -1. Josh Lambo, not good enough, my man.
And my fantasy dud of the week will have to go to Julio Jones, who I'm used to putting up usually 60 points or 80 points a week, kind of in that range. He's just been an all-out monster. He only put up 3 today in a Falcons win, but still, Julio, come on. I need you to put up 200 yards again.
All right. My fantasy dud coming from the Crease Criminals team, one of my other fantasy squads. James White, running back for my New England Patriots. He'd been playing pretty well. I had some running backs on buys this week, so I threw him in there, hoping he'd maybe, catch some balls out of the backfield, do some good things. Only 15 yards rushing and 14 yards receiving. So that's 29 total yards, only 2 points for my buddy James White. Meanwhile, his counterpart, LeGarrette Blount, ended up getting in the end zone. So I was a little upset. Only got 2 points out of my running back too, James White. I'm positive you'll step it up in the coming weeks.
To close out our Week 8 episode, we will each give a topic of biggest surprise mid-season. For me, it has to be the Oakland Raiders organization, currently sitting at 6-2, first place in the very competitive AFC West, and just truly dominating on the offensive side of the ball. 6th in points per game, 5th in yards, 4th in passing yards, and 8th in rushing yards. Just a very balanced offensive attack. Latavius Murray having a good year. Derek Carr having an MVP year. 2,321 yards through the air. 17 touchdowns, only 3 picks. That's incredible. Quarterback rating of 100.9 thus far this season. And we already know about their electric receivers, Mari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. The defense has been pretty bad, but better in recent weeks. So if the defense can come around and just do their job, I think the Raiders are my biggest surprise of this year. And they can definitely make some noise in the AFC if that defense starts coming around.
Does Derek Carr really have 17 touchdowns?
Yep.
That's so sneaky.
Yeah.
I mean, Carson Wentz has 9, and I thought he was doing well. What? Okay. Moving on, my biggest surprise this year will be the Carolina Panthers. Last year, lost in the Super Bowl, but they were one of the best teams in the NFL. I mean, they had a record of 15-1. They had the best offense in football, best defense in football, quarterback, MVP, Cam Newton. Now they're 2-5. I don't really know what happened. I mean, they lost Josh Norman, and I knew their secondary would get worse, but not this much worse. And their offense really, I mean, their offense got back Kelvin Benjamin, and they're even worse than what they left off. So I don't really know what's going on with the Panthers right now. Yet the season is young, so we'll see if they can turn it around.
All right, my biggest surprise halfway through the NFL season has to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I remember early on in this show, I was picking the Jags to, kind of be a contender this year because I thought they had some good young pieces in place. I really trusted Bortles. Picked him up in like 3 out of my 4 fantasy leagues. That was a mistake. The Jaguars are 2-5. They're at the bottom of that already pretty weak AFC South division, and they are the weakest of the weak. So, the Jaguars have just totally underperformed so far this year. You thought that young defense was going to play better with Miles Jack, Jalen Ramsey, the likes of those players. So, just overall disappointing. Chris Ivory has not been as good as he was last year behind that kind of bad Jags O-line. Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns have not been able to produce the way they did late into last season. So overall, the Jags just have kind of had a wasted year. And now I think they just got to try to reboot and get ready to have a young team going forward that can find some success.
And that'll do it for us on 4th and Inches, our Week 8 episode. We had a good time. We hope you had a good time. I'm Nate Smith.
I'm Jordan D'Souza.
And I'm Cree.
That's episode 8 of 4th and Inches.